Look, you officially 3 minutes left, but we're going to give you another couple of minutes as well to just finish the deliberations, and we'll come to see the stage we're at for the ballot. Thank you.
Just one further point to clarify on this
John,
one. A bit like the last question, we're looking here for a single option that has a clear majority in the room. It's not that you go for the one that has the highest number of votes. We need a 51%. If that's the case, then that particular option is your decision. If it's not, you'll get a similar paper for each drug or class of drugs, but you'll need to decide how you split all the various drugs up into either groups, whether you vote on every one individually or sections. You could still end up, when you do that, ending up with the same option voted on individually for each drug. It doesn't rule it out. So this one is only to see if we can shortcut that whole process by finding a single option that everybody agrees with, or that the majority agree with. If we don't, we go on to the individual questions, and you get the chance to vote again on those.
John, did you want to make them?
The issue of a health approach is
Just keep the mic up near you, John, please.
The issue of a health-led approach is correct, but we also seem to be missing another element, which is education. There seems to be a big gap there.
It does come up later in the balloting process, okay. John. Some recommendations around.
Yeah, there's a ballot paper on dealing with prevention and education later in the process.
Thanks, Nick. It's just a quick question. It just says here the status quo is for all drugs, all drugs, all drugs. Will there be a time, because first and second class drugs are very different, and I think there's an element in the room of people that want maybe marijuana legalised, and if I was to sign off on one of these models, will it come later on that we're going to look at drugs individually?
I think colleges tried to go through that one there, which would be option F.
Yeah, but I don't really want to sign F, Paul, because I don't really know what I'm signing up for.
So if you sign up to F, we go on to stage 3 of the voting, which, as Kieran said, will examine in more forensic detail which model you want for different drugs. Okay. Now, we're not going to go through the whole list of drugs. The room here will agree, and Paul will facilitate the process, which drugs should be on the ballot paper. So, as you said, there may be a number of people in the room who want to propose different treatment for cannabis compared to other drugs. So that could be one of the options. If there's an argument that the room agrees with for including, let's say, heroin or cocaine or magic mushrooms or whatever, if there's a sufficient support in the room for that to be included, we can vote on those as well as distinct options.
So but I have to put in an X on the F
if you're not
to get there, right?
If you're not in favour of one single model for all drugs, yes, F is
okay, thanks so much. I'm sorry to double down on that question. No problem. Thank you.
Niamh?
Can I just say, would you mind explaining the ballots, just like maybe 2 minutes? And like I can set a timer if you want.
The definitions of each one.
Well, just explaining what we're voting on, because like we've spent the majority of the time confused trying to discuss what we were actually voting on. So maybe just a 2-minute thing of like
this particular ballot paper too.
No, everyone, because the first one I was confused as well, what we were looking at, and then why we were moving on to this one. So just maybe a very brief, like maybe people don't agree with me, but a very brief synopsis of just what we're voting, what we're looking at in this aspect. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing now, we're still on ballot paper 2, which is looking at legal options, and we're filtering our way down into a decision, right? So the first decision was the majority of the room do not support the status quo for all drugs. So now we're at stage 2, which is to see, does the majority of the room support a universal approach for all drugs based on any of the other models? So it includes all the options A, B, C, D and E, and also a 6th option, which is to say, let's move on to a more detailed filtering down again to say we don't support an overall approach for all drugs. Let's get into a hybrid model for different drugs, different approaches for different drugs. So we're kind of filtering our way down in greater detail into where we'll eventually get to a majority decision on one of the options. If that
quick question. For the option E, it says legalization and regulation for all drugs.
Yes.
But if you go on the E, on the explanation, it says clearly that for some or all. in here, in this paper, it's very misleading. They should say the same, like it says in in the option E.
Okay.
Should say for some or all.
Okay.
Because
so-
for a lot of people will probably not tick that box because they will think it will be all drugs. But it says clearly it's not for all drugs. It could
No,
be for some or all.
Yeah, okay, so that is a useful question because I think there probably is a mismatch, right? The question you're looking at in ballot paper 2.2 is about all drugs. So do you want to legalise all drugs is option?
It says for some or all.
Yes, okay, that's probably, that is a mistake, okay? So the question in ballot paper 2 is asking, do you want to legalise 2.2, the question you're looking at the moment is, do you want to legalise, option E is legalise all drugs, okay? Option F would be the option you would choose if you only want to legalise certain drugs. And you want to decriminalise others, or you want to have a health-led approach. So option F is the option to choose, no matter what variation you want of a different approach for different drugs. And then we'll get into that details. But thanks.
It says for all drugs here.
It does, yeah, but what she's saying is in the narrative
Okay.
early in the process.
Okay, okay. Sorry, can we have a mic here?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask,
Sorry, folks, we just get quiet.
based on the results of the stage 2 vote, will that impact what will happen for stage 3? Like, let's say, for example, there's an overall greater preference for, let's say, Model C over Models B and A. Will that be reflective? Will that be reflected in the third stage of voting for the ballot paper number 2?
No, it has no bearing other than to trigger stage 3 voting. And stage 3 voting, you're back to the drawing board, but you can be a little bit more specific about how you want to break up, if you want to break up your approach for different drugs. So, but it doesn't have any influence on the results of counting stage 3. You go back to the drawing board. Yeah. If there's a majority for any option at stage 2, which you're just about to vote on, then that becomes the result. But if there's not an overall majority, it triggers stage 3 voting. Okay?
I just going to go over here first, then we come back to you, in fairness. Okay, go on. We'll come back to you now, Barbara.
Zin?
Zane, can we go?
Oh, sorry. So just a quick question. For people vote for the status quo option A, like, are they considered as valid? Because
Yes.
it's already...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
People
Thank
may
you.
want to vote for that again, or more people might move.
Yes.
Yeah.
As we are just about to vote, I think it's really important that we absolutely clarify that if we want change and if we want to make recommendations, are we to tick the hybrid? And I echo Joanne's point about kind of signing up to something that we're not really sure about. So I just really want to be sure, because we don't get a chance to do this again. We don't get to come back on it. So let's say, for example, if we want to make specific recommendations, and I'm sure we all have our own personal views and things that struck chords with us over the several months of meetings, can we just, really make it simple without going into too many complicated words? If we want to if we don't tick a hybrid, or whichever, say whatever the majority is, are all the other options here off the table?
So, So the question you're looking at now is about a universal approach for all drugs, right? So for example, right, if you look at Ireland, we don't have a universal approach for all drugs. Cannabis is already treated slightly differently in the way that the criminal justice system approaches it. So for example, first-time cannabis offences can avail of the adult caution, right? So that's different from all other drugs at the moment, right? So Ireland has a slightly distinguished point approach to cannabis versus other drugs. If you look in contrast, Portugal, the Portuguese model, takes the same approach to every drug. There's no distinction between different classes of drugs. So the question, we do know from the feedback we've been getting over the balloting design process, is that some members here want to see a different approach, particularly for cannabis. And there are other members here who have a particular view around, for example, plant-based medicine, right? So We want to allow the opportunity for this room to decide whether there should be a universal approach that applies to every drug, which is the question in front of you now, except for Model F, which is triggering the hybrid approach for different drugs. So if you want every drug to be legalised and regulated, then you vote in the ballot paper in front of you for option E. If you want every drug to have a health-led approach, you vote for ballot C. If you want to distinguish between cannabis and other drugs, and you want, let's say you want Model A for every drug except cannabis, and you want Model B or Model C or Model D or Model E for cannabis, then you vote F on the ballot paper now, and it then triggers the next round of voting where you go into more detail, where you explain exactly how you want to distinguish between different drugs.
So, Rebecca, if a person wants a single model for all drugs, your options are A to E. Mm-hmm. If you want a model that would apply differently to different drugs, your option is option F. Is that clear?
And just, so if whatever the majority is from this ballot, does it take scenario A to F? Let's say, for example, it was C, just for an example. Does it take all the other options off the table for discussion and making our recommendations on? Are we then only focusing on on option C?
If the first preference of the room, let's say 40% of the room votes for Model C, that doesn't become a recommendation. Unless there's a majority of 51% in the room for any of those models, we automatically go to third stage voting.
And we remove the other options from the table. We're not discussing those scenarios any longer. That's my question.
Well, they will be there as one of the options in a combination. So you'll still have model options A, B, C, D, and E for each drug.
But if we vote for C, that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Oh yeah, if 51%, yes,
right.
exactly.
Yeah.
If there's an overall majority for any of those options in front of you right
That's what
now,
stands.
that becomes the recommendation.
Okay, so it's really important that we get this right.
Yeah, so don't vote for one of those options if you want a different approach to different drugs. If you want a different approach to any drug, vote Model F. Otherwise, if you want the same approach to every drug, vote your choice of A, B, C, D or E, and only vote once.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I think that clarifies a little more. Thank you.
Just can we get a mic here, please, Eliza? Just here up the front, please. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, we discussed A, the wording of it, and came back to you about that. I'm just wondering why we're being asked to give an overall which one we like when we haven't gone through every other one first, like we did with A. Do we like the wording of it? Should we change it before we make a decision? I just feel the question that we're being asked now should be our last question, not our second one. Does that make sense?
The question you're asking now might be our last one, actually. It might be
But we haven't discussed the other ones yet.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't been given afforded the opportunity to say, well, in section C, it would either minimalise or completely remove. It should be one or the other. It's too vast.
Yeah.
Everything is just, we're not being given that opportunity. We went through A with a fine-tooth comb, but now we're being told, okay, A is off the table, pick which one you want, but we won't discuss it. And it just doesn't really make sense. But we're not. A, we discussed the wording and we voted on it, but we're not doing that with the rest. We're now jumping to pick a model. A has gone off the table. We went through A on its own. We're not going through B on its own, C on its own. We're just being told, pick one. I just think that it needs to be looked at individually.
Okay, well, look, we can reconfigure it if needs be to sort of spend some time going through the questions, but it's obviously we just need to reschedule how we're running this option, right? The question about should it be, the example you gave there in C, should it be all the time or eliminate or significantly reduce? The reason we put that in there is because that's not something that the Citizens' Assembly can decide on, right? So it's referring that question back into the Oireachtas. There isn't enough clarity on the legal status of decriminalising, whether it's within option C or option D. There's detailed constitutional and legal questions that we don't have the the time or the capacity to resolve. And that's why that question is being referred back into the Oireachtas, as you can see in the text, right? So the answer is we give a high-level direction as a kind of a strategic sense of direction to the Oireachtas about what the objective is, but the details of how the legal mechanism can support that and to what degree it can support it has to be figured out by the Oireachtas, not by the Assembly. So that's why there's that, as you might call it vagueness, it's actually clarity, saying there is an unanswered question here about the legal mechanism best suited to achieving decriminalisation either through option C or option D. But that's a question that we can't answer. We don't have the legal expertise, and the Oireachtas has to engage with its legal advisors, the Attorney Generals, the barristers who can advise on what is possible. So we give the sense of direction with option C and option D, which is to maximise or achieve a level of decriminalisation, but let the Oireachtas then work out through the constitutional and legal details about how best that can be accomplished.
So just to restate one more time, options A to E is where you would express your preferred model for all drugs. Option F is where you want to have an option to have a different approach for different drugs. So if you want one single approach, it's A to E. If you want to have a different approach for different drugs, it's F.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I'd just like to ask if there's some doubt in the room about whether we proceed to a vote, can we use the red and green cards? Because I think some people would like to proceed to a vote.
Just clarify it again, so I...
Yeah, if there is some doubt in the room about whether or not we want to proceed to a vote, could we use the red and green cards to read the room? Because I think there are people in the room who would prefer to proceed to a vote as well.
Okay. You know, and I did say earlier on I will call that. I'm just trying to do justice to people to help them, but we'll take another question, and it's a fair point. Okay, I'm going to take two more questions, and I think that's good input where we'll just test the room. Niamh and Maura. Niamh first, Maura. Then.
Can we vote on whether or not we want to go through every, kind of like a hands up, who wants to go through every option?
Let me just come back to that again, because I think it's similar, similar point.
Okay.
We can. Maura?
Paula, do you want to go live?
I feel that if I vote for B, I'll be voting to move to decriminalisation. If I vote for C, I think C, the state should introduce a comprehensive health-led response to possession of drugs for personal use. I think that is a nuanced way of legalising drugs.
Okay, Maura. And just to clarify, B is just to move to the current position of the legislation that's on the shelf within the current model. It's not to decriminalise.
I think, did you mean D?
No, I meant B. Where it says the government should introduce a planned health diversion legislation. I don't think it's full decriminalisation, but I think it's very close to it. It's leaving it open. And would it not have been more straightforward, to put it that way? And to put C, it's a kind of a nuanced way, a comprehensive. That means that it's all health. Yeah, I'd feel then that the courts and guards and that were just written more or less out. They wouldn't have any power. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I think we need to discuss that more. Thank you.
Yeah. I would say there's probably a couple of things that you would need to have clarified for you to understand the differences between B, C and D for that matter, but we can come back to that.
I'm going to take one more question just in the back, and I'm going to test where the room are.
I'm just wondering with regard to options B to E inclusive, if any of those options are chosen, is there an opportunity to fine-tune the scope or wording thereafter, excluding this stipulation that it applies to all drugs, but the wording and the scope, is there an opportunity to fine-tune that thereafter?
Fine-tuning is one thing, like if there's a fundamental need to redesign the question, then it's probably best done before the voting happens. So fine-tuning is, so if you can sort of look at the headline vote for the voting question for options A, B, C, D and E, you can see the voting recommendation itself is quite short. And that's the high-level direction that the Assembly wishes to give, the kind of strategic sense of direction or direction of travel, as Paul would have said, to the Oireachtas. The fine-tuning of it is probably lies in the body of the explanatory narrative. And that, I think, it can be best done in the drafting of the report, right? If there's any components that are missing or that need amendment, we can hear from each of you in the drafting of the report once we get beyond the initial choice of recommendation. That would be one efficient way to do it.
Can I just check and look, this is important, so, you know, we knew this was a more complex, sorry, the most complex piece. Can I just check based on a suggestion? It can be just a simple show of hands, if we'll use the colour cards if we need to, but based on a show of hands, at your table, are you ready to proceed on this ballot paper, on this vote right now? So who feels we are ready? Okay. And who feels we're not ready, just for clarity? Okay, I think it's a very clear majority of people really want to proceed. And I'm not trying to dismiss anything that's come up, but I think there's a very clear majority of people want to proceed on the vote. So can we move now, please, to make sure we have the ballot papers out for people to express a vote, and then we take stock after that. Thank you. Sorry, everybody, it's the colour orange ballot paper. Just make sure as you're casting, colour orange. I'm no good on colour. Yeah. Hold on, there's somebody.
Okay. If everybody has to vote on the orange ballot paper. If anybody has voted or has a white paper, you need to go back to your table and get the orange one. Okay. And if anybody has accidentally put in a white ballot paper, you need to go back and get your orange one to go into the box. Thank you.
Some of them have it in their packet. I didn't see any going in, but did they? Did any whites go in? Okay. Okay, well spotted. Yeah.
If we end up with 87 plus the white,
Yes.
we can assume that that will be
Yeah.
Can I just check now that everybody has had the opportunity to vote with an orange ballot paper? One more. Two more. One's in. Okay, has everybody now had the opportunity? I know. That's why I'm saying it. Has everybody now had the opportunity? Because we're going to close the ballot. Zane, we're going to have to close the ballot. Okay, Zin, I am going to have to close the ballot, please. Sorry, no, but we have to cast your vote. Thank you. Okay, now formally closing that stage of the ballot process. Please give us some time with our two independent observers. We'll make the count and we'll revert as soon as possible. The ballot boxes are now sealed, well sealed anyway. Okay.
Well done, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you again for your time. No pressure, just hurry up there, Jesse and Marcus.